Risk factors of asbestos. Topics to be covered in this module. Exposure to asbestos, the risk and adverse health effects. Profile of a killer, surprising facts of asbestos. When do you need a license to work with asbestos? UK asbestos exposure deaths. Famous asbestos deaths. Why asbestos-related deaths have increased so much. Why it can take decades for symptoms of asbestos-related diseases to appear. Health risks from asbestos. What are asbestos diseases? The main types of asbestos-related disease and the parts of the body they affect. The primary cause of asbestos-related diseases. Who has the highest risk of having an asbestos disease? Friability of ACMS. Asbestos and smoking. Summary. Exposure to asbestos, the risk and adverse health effects. The danger of inhaling asbestos dust has been known in the UK since the 1890s. Medical advancements in the 20th century have proven links between asbestos fibers and cancer, as well as respiratory conditions. Unfortunately, this also coincided with its popularity as a multi-use cheap building material. Asbestos is branded as a Category Type 1 carcinogen and all types used in the UK, white, blue, brown, can cause cancer in the human body, although some disputed reports point to white being the slightly less dangerous type, hence it being banned in 1999, as opposed to 1985 with the other types. It is also accepted that lung cancer caused by asbestos is virtually identical to that caused by smoking, which can blur the exact number of fatalities from asbestos exposure. However, doctors agree that if you smoke and were exposed to asbestos, you have a much higher chance of developing lung cancer than if you did neither. Despite occasional discrepancies and differing percentage measurements within the medical community, the widely accepted view is that if you inhaled asbestos fibers for a sustained period within the last 60 years, you are at risk of contracting an asbestos-related disease. Profile of a killer, surprising facts about asbestos. The fact that asbestos was so widely used after it was known to cause health problems is just one additional twist in the history of this deadly substance. It has proven to be a long-lasting menace with some surprising victims. UK asbestos exposure deaths. The fatalities that can be attributed directly to asbestos in the UK do not look to be slowing down anytime soon. At the end of 2018, the HSE, Health and Safety Executive, recorded the following statistics. Over 5,000 asbestos-related disease deaths were occurring annually, including mesothelioma, lung cancer and asbestosis. There were 2,595 deaths in 2016 alone from mesothelioma and a comparable number of lung cancer deaths directly linked to asbestos. There were also 500 confirmed deaths from asbestosis in 2016. As noted in the previous slide, some lung cancer deaths can be attributable to a combination of long-term smoking and asbestos inhalation, but the figures are still alarming to many. Famous asbestos deaths. Several well-known celebrities have had exposure to asbestos, which has sadly led directly to their death in later years. Arguably the most famous person to succumb to an asbestos-related disease was the actor Steve McQueen. The star of The Great Escape and numerous other Hollywood blockbusters spent his youth working in Washington, D.C.'s Naval Yard as a Marine, where he was certainly exposed to asbestos. His hobby as a sports car racing may also have added to that exposure. McQueen died in 1980 due to pleural mesothelioma, which was definitely caused by contact with asbestos. The hugely popular disco singer Donna Summer died in 2012 from lung cancer. A non-smoker, it was assumed that she had contracted the disease by being in New York during the terrorist attack on the Twin Towers on 9/11. The incident caused large swathes of toxic clouds and asbestos to be inhaled by inhabitants at the time, making the legacy even more tragic. Paul Gleason, the stern principal from the iconic teen comedy The Breakfast Club, 1985, was another actor who died from exposure to asbestos that would eventually result in mesothelioma. He worked with his father in construction sites as a teenager, and it was there that he came into regular contact with ACMS. He passed away in 2006. It is quite likely that other celebrity deaths may be attributed to early contact with asbestos, but were masked by their heavy smoking habits. Why have asbestos-related deaths increased so much? One of the main reasons that numbers of asbestos-related deaths seem to be fluctuating and rising can be attributed to the fact that early deaths were misreported, ignored, or misunderstood. Now the carcinogenic qualities of ACM are understood, there is more accurate reporting about employee deaths and statistics. But why are deaths still occurring when it was banned 20 years ago? The answer to that is twofold and down to one of the most desirable qualities about asbestos. It is an incredibly hardy and long-lasting substance that won't degrade in any way. It still exists in thousands of properties that were built before 1999. It will take many years before all of those constructions are safely demolished, and in some cases, it is much safer to just leave the ACMS alone. Therefore, the danger of exposure still exists despite regulations. The durability of the fiber, combined with their microscopic destructive capabilities, which means it can happily reside in the human body for many years before causing disease. This means that the deadly legacy of asbestos will be with us for some time in the UK. Why it can take a long time for symptoms of asbestos-related diseases to appear. Depending on the exposure levels at the time, and the amount of time spent working with it, it can take anything from 10 to 60 years for asbestos-related cancer to occur in a sufferer. This means that teenage years spent working with ACMs might not cause symptoms until that employee has long since retired. This is another reason why asbestos-related disease may be on the rise, as latency periods run out. The asbestos fibers are so hardy and small that the immune system cannot flush them successfully from the body. So once they are breathed in, they can exist in the body for many years and even migrate to various parts of the anatomy before cause lung cancer or other diseases. Health risks from asbestos. We have mentioned the main risks and diseases that asbestos can cause, but now we'll go into some further details about each one. What are asbestos diseases? There are 4 major diseases that are closely linked to asbestos exposure. Mesothelioma, a cancer that affects internal organs, is incurable and always fatal. Lung cancer, also caused by smoking, which has a synergistic if the two causes collide, and creates more risk of contracting it. Asbestosis, a disease that is characterized by a crackling cough, and severe respiratory problems. Pleural plaques, causes a thickening of membranes in the body and accumulate a chalky buildup of material. The main types of asbestos-related disease and the parts of the body they affect. Mesothelioma, it attacks the pleural lining, thin membrane, of the chest cavity and the peritoneum, lining of the abdomen. Lung cancer, directly affects the lungs, with the severity of the condition depends on the dosage. As stated, smoking also increases the chance of contracting this disease. Asbestosis affects the lungs and gradually, and irreversibly, degrades the functions of them according to the amount of exposure. Pleural plaques, this specifically targets the pleura, which is layered membrane surrounding your lungs and lining the inside of your rib cage. But unlike mesothelioma, it is benign and not life-threatening. It indicates exposure to asbestos but does not naturally lead to any of the above diseases, resulting in noticeable calcium deposits internally. The primary cause of asbestos-related diseases. Each of these major diseases can primarily be traced back to the internal organs being directly exposed to the harmful and carcinogenic fibers of asbestos, all types. The microscopic fibers were either inhaled or ingested via the nose/mouth, usually in the form of dust, debris, or powder. The sharp fibers can penetrate the lining of the lungs. If the fibers breach the alveoli, tiny air sacs in the lungs, they become stuck within that area of the body and cause lung diseases. They can also migrate to other areas of the body, creating the other internal damage already mentioned. Who has the highest risk of having asbestos disease, including from secondary exposure? Any workers who are primarily involved in decoration, demolition, refurbishment, maintenance and similar professions are among those most naturally at risk from asbestos disease. Obvious examples would include heating engineers, plumbers, carpenters and joiners, plumbers, plasterers and so on. Obviously, if legislation is followed, along with licensing rules, then the chances of risk drop significantly. The danger of secondary exposure should also be taken into consideration. This can occur when those living with asbestos workers come into contact with dust or fibers from their workplace. Although this exposure will be at a lower level, it can still result in any of the 4 major diseases if significant precautions are not taken. There have been instances where family members and children have been exposed in this manner and contracted an asbestos-related disease. Friability of ACMS. As we have covered in previous modules, the exposure of a person to asbestos fibers can depend on the friability of the ACM involved. The more friable an ACM is, the more likely it is to crumble into dust or powder when disturbed, greatly increasing the risk involved. ICMS classified as being highly friable include sprayed asbestos coatings, loose fill insulation, pipe and heater lagging. Non-friable ACMS generally included bonding agents, cement, or coated materials. However, even these can become friable with age, and prone to release fibers when disturbed. As always when dealing with asbestos materials, a full risk assessment of the substance will be required prior to any work. Asbestos and smoking. Whilst it's known that asbestos fibers can scar and damage lungs, and cause cancer in its wake, we have referred to the fact that smoking also adds to the risk. Why there is a high risk of lung cancer for asbestos workers who smoke. If a person continues to smoke whilst working with asbestos, their chance of contracting lung cancer can rise to 50 to 80%. The reason for this is that tobacco and asbestos act together to impact the ability of the lungs. Simply put, smoking weakens lung tissue, allowing asbestos fibers to become more easily embedded in the organs. Smoking causes mucus to increase and prevents the immune system from successfully cleaning the lungs. It's simple cause and effect. Summary. In this module, you have learned that the risk of disease remains long after initial exposure to asbestos, and can take up to 60 years to manifest. Well-known figures have suffered early deaths due to asbestos. 4 main types of asbestos-related diseases exist. Only certain parts of the body are affected by the presence of asbestos fibers. Secondary exposure to asbestos holds a real risk.